So this is like an old presentation that I found in some stuff I was going through, and I thought going back to basics a little bit would be good, especially since we have quite a few new officials that I know I've talked to over the summer. Some of them are here today. Some are returning officials, so veteran officials, if you get a chance to see somebody you don't know, reach out to them and talk to them a little bit. But I thought this was a good way to kind of come back to some basic stuff. So areas we're going to cover today: body alignment and balance, the forward approach, back approach, entries, positions, dive categories, and then there's some nice golden rules and final thoughts that I have in this as well. So body alignment and balance, the key foundation to good board work is their takeoff execution of the dive, right? So we want kind of tall, we want them standing tall. We're looking at them on their side, okay? This is a good place that when they come up and they're getting that starting position, we're watching how their body lineup is. So if they've got a slight bend in their knees and they're doing a pike position dive, more than likely they're not going to get their knees to lock all the way out, okay? So keeping that in mind. Their rib cage is kind of up, so they're standing straight, soldier-esque kind of idea for that, okay? And then their head and neck is drawn in. Hips are rotated forward to create a straight line in the lower back. So we're trying to see the back as straight as it can be. Again, that's something we're going to watch on the board. If they're not quite straight or they're leaning forward a little bit, we're going to notice that on the board of what they're going to look like when they're performing the dive, okay? And then their center of balance is shift forward over the feet. So they're going to be leaning forward a little bit because they're going to want to take that step, right? So we usually lean, even when we're walking, we do lean forward a little bit in order to make that step. Otherwise, our balance gets off and we don't do it well, okay? Forward approach and the back press or back approach. So forward approach, our starting position, head is upright, body is upright, we're doing straight body, right? From head to toe. Legal forward approach shall begin with, this is what you're going to fill in the blank on this, okay? Starts with no less than 3 steps, okay? So they've come to their starting position, 1, 2, 3, okay? They have to take those 3 steps. What happens if they don't take those 3 steps? Yeah, it's a 0 dive. Okay. All right. And then we finish with the hurdle. All right. And it's defined as a jump. It's 1 foot or both, 1 foot. Usually they come off on 1 foot and land on both feet at the end of the board and then take off. Okay. What's that? Yeah. Yeah. He asked if they do less than 3 steps, if it's a 0 dive, and that is the case.
So you're supposed to come down at the end of the board. I have a question about the end of the board. I know it's a little bit unsafe and can make the dive difficult to sometimes go backwards on the hurdle.
Yes.
So is there any help for us in terms of how far is too far from the end of the board?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's what I'd like to know.
So do you see we had the board over here, which is great. They're actually in the pool area. So on the end of the board, you see that black area, right? We want them landing in that safety box, okay? Most of the time, the rivets don't go all the way to the end of the board, so that kind of gives the diver the indication that, okay, this is my safe zone for me to take off. If they come back, because sometimes I've seen it, where that diver will jump back out of that safety box and then take off, they're not going to get a good dive for one, but that's also a safety concern that you can deduct for. Okay. So what was asked is, are there any significant guidelines for us to do, to look at, of what we should do as far as deductions go? Right? Anybody want? Yeah.
I would tend to treat it as just sort of a mandatory deduction and take, the half a point to two, depending on how severe it is, but I don't know. And I also have a question about over the end of the board.
Yeah, because actually, I was watching some of the Olympic stuff, and there were some of those guys that were getting like right on the end of that board, and they were still getting off the board pretty well. But yeah, so I think it does depend, it kind of is on you to kind of say, man, they came really far back on that board before they took off, and that's a safety concern, so I have to too. Just depending on what you got. It's kind of like your crow hop. If they're coming off a little bit, we may only go half, but if they're coming up really far off that board, we're going to deduct more.
Kelly, I think when you look at the totality of the dive, many of us that have touched it for a long time, when they go up off the back, it's going to shoot them out. It's going to affect their score as it is. It's really hard to come up straight up if you're too far back.
Okay, and I want to clarify something. I apologize. When they only do the 3-step approach, it's actually, we're deducting 2. It's like a block. I apologize. Okay. The diver may use steps, hops, leaps, or jumps during their initial steps. I think this last season was probably the one that I saw with the most interesting approaches. There were some like weird stutter kind of things, and so it was very eclectic or very eclectic approaches that we saw. And that would be before the hurdle. So when they come up and into the jump, okay? Arms should be swinging kind of in a very natural way, very smooth. Their arms shouldn't necessarily be rigid. They should be kind of comfortable in their dives. The really good divers, you'll see that, where they're just kind of like coming into it, doing their hurdle, their arms are very smooth, they're very relaxed, and they just make the whole thing look really natural, very nice, okay? The newer divers have a tendency to, they kind of freak out, especially at first meet. They're really tense, and that's their deal, and that'll affect their dive. The forward takeoff shall be from both feet simultaneously, so they're coming to the end of the board, they're coming up off their feet to take off the board. We want them to get to an adequate height off that board to perform that dive. They should be using the board as a tool to get up off that board to perform that dive. Where should their dive finish? Before they pass the board, right? So before they pass the board, they should have that dive should be completed and not like trying to sneak it in at the end. It doesn't make it really pretty usually that way, okay? The hops, leaps, and jumps shall be considered steps. So think about that. So we want to look at that as part of their forward motion on their dive. Divers should land balanced on the end of the board to allow them to obtain reasonable height and acceptable distance from the board. What's the rule if they're freaking us out? Because they're getting too close to the board. Right? We can decide as referees, we can decide to do no more than 2. Okay? It's kind of a new rule, so we got to just get used to that one. Huh? When they're making you jump out of your seat, that's too close. But I think, weren't we saying like 6 inches? Like that's too close.
If it's a safety issue.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at it as a safety thing. Hold on. Okay. No, you're good. You got good questions.
So we're talking about too close, I understand that. How about too far away? I see that happen all the time, and it doesn't seem like there is enough of a deduction.
Yes.
So I'm just curious as to how far away is too far away.
Yeah, and we will get into that, I promise. All right, so things to consider. So takeoff should be dynamic, and there should be what to that dive? Height. Okay, so that's that missing piece there. Not distance. Okay, so yeah. I think a lot of the times when we're kind of looking at it from the distance perspective, if we've got 3 judges on that one side, we're going from, you know, we got our referee usually is closest to the board. Our third official is quite a ways out. If they're out past that third official, yeah, that's too far. Okay, so we should be kind of in between, you know, the 6 inches, 8 inches from the board to 3 feet. It's probably even getting a little bit far. And if you do the officiating at VMAC and they're heading towards the competition pool, it's probably not good. Okay, so keep that in mind. So we're going to be deducting for that. What do you guys think? So she asked, how much do we deduct depending on the distance? If they're getting 3 to 4 feet out, that seems like a safe zone.
Every customer comes in the fact that we have 3 judges and they take the average. Everybody has their breaking point. It depends on I would say it's getting there, but if it's going to, like, usually there's ladders or they got the ropes, and if you think it's infringing, it's definitely too far. And this is conversations as a crew, when you debrief and feedback.
So with the way that this pool is configured, I have seen at a pool that a kid took off too far and hit his head on the bottom of the pool. That's too far. Yeah.
And if you want the book's definition, so a 2.5 to a 4.5, a deficient dive, the height and distance is inadequate. So anything that's too far out should not be anything higher than 4.5. Yeah, It's page 106, appendix C.
You're all good. Okay. All right, so then the back approach. Permitted only for which type of dives? Back dive or inward. Okay, we're going to be at the end of the board. Toes usually, sometimes they do the ball of the foot. They'll be there. And again, nice body position.
We do allow no approach though for forward dive.
And we also do it for twisting dives. Okay, so that's your third space on there. When they're doing a back or an inward twisting dive. Okay. Divers should stop what? Oscillating the board. I have seen times where we're going out there, the board is going because the kids walked out there and the board is still going. I'm like, stop the board. And they just continue to go. And so we deduct for that, half to 2 points. Yes?
So I have the same question about the next 3 items you're going to talk about. The stopping the oscillation, the excessive oscillation, the crow hop, and actually the tuck also, all 4 of those things. Given that the 1.5 to 2 points, I mean, what do you look at? It seems to me a lot of those are ignored, just in the general practice of officiating the diving. And I'm just curious how the more experienced officials either take a half point or 2. Because on some of these dives, like the one they're going to do a back dive, and they walk out and oscillating, and then they never stop, and then they throw hop, and then they're off to the side of the board. I mean, literally take off 6 points before they really do the dive.
Absolutely.
And really, it's a scale, right? They give you that half point to 2 points for a reason. If they're walking out and the board is just a little bit wobbly, maybe that's a half point. But if they're like prancing out there and that board's really going the whole time, you're probably going to be leaning more towards that 2 point deduction. Same with the crow hop. If the feet leave the board just a little bit, probably more of just a half point deduction. But if they're taking, a foot off the board for that crow hop, you're going to lean more towards that 2 point deduction. Same with the tucks. If they're circus tucking all the way out here, that's going to be a bigger deduction than something that's kind of smaller here.
I understand that explanation, and thank you. That doesn't seem to be the way it happens in reality. Especially the tuck is something I was going to bring up. You called it the circus tuck?
Yeah.
I was told by one of the coaches that that's sort of the way it's taught. And in the Olympics, obviously, everybody does that.
But here's the difference, okay? And I'm not going to demonstrate it. But when they're doing the tucks and I was really being very conscious to watch that during the Olympics this year. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, they're actually pulling their knees up to their shoulders. So they are opening up a little bit. But what we're thinking of, in a lot of ways, we actually have kind of talked about this. If they're you can't see their ears, that's a problem. Like they're getting their knees all the way up here and they're out. It's a little bit different. But I was watching that this year, and it was a matter of it's kind of coming more up to the shoulder than it is like really a huge cowboy kind of thing where you're actually riding a horse.
And the better divers can do the tuck just coming straight down into it. When you get into higher rotations like a 2.5, a 3, a 3.5, that's when they're going to spread those legs more to try to get the rotations in, and you have to apply that penalty on because you don't want to reward a harder dive just because it's a harder dive. You still have to apply the rules to that dive.
Right, but the description in the rule book says the feet and the knees should be, I forget what it says exactly, close together. The feet and the knees, and that just doesn't happen quite often, especially with some of the guys trying to do a forward 3.5. That's when the knees are very apart, and the feet also.
Right, and if you see it, apply the penalty, and it should be scored.
What I'm saying is, it doesn't seem to happen, and it's also because of the 3 judges sitting on the or the judge that's furthest out, you can see it better. The judge close in, you can see it a little bit. The one in the middle is sort of lost. You really can't tell.
Well, I think that's the other deal is that because of our vantage point, like if we were all standing over here watching the dives, oh yeah, we're going to see that all day. We're not necessarily going to see it when we're sitting on the side, right? Because they do kind of bring it in really tight. But yeah, that's kind of the advantage of having the 3 people, or 7, 9, whatever it is, right? That is kind of the advantage.
And the good part about the clinic is we're doing this is to try to get everybody on the same page to make our scores more consistent. The biggest thing the coaches and divers can ask for us is to be consistent, right? So we're not scoring Judge A differently than Diver B. The rule book's getting applied to all of them the same. And when you've got veteran officials on the crew, you should be debriefing on diving as well and saying, hey, if you remember that pike dive, you might have missed a break, or if you're new, absolutely ask your veteran official, say like, hey, I scored it this way, you scored it that way, do you remember why? And all the veteran officials are more than happy to tell you what they saw from their perspective.
And just before you talk again, I just want to reiterate the fact that these are good points for debriefing. We are high school officials. We are not USA officials. USA divers tend to crow hop a lot. That's not us. So when you listen to all this today, let's keep this in perspective that this is National Federation.
All right, when you look at all the other rule codes, USA Diving, FINA, they all have deductions for crow hops. They choose not to call those crow hops. But when we go back to circus tucks, okay, the reason why the diver, okay, they can be out shoulder width, okay, with their feet and their knees. They need to be out shoulder width so that they've got a visual to see the water as they are rotating. That shows them, I mean, they've got this little spot between their legs. It's the same with a pike. You will see some pike guys hiking like this because they need to see the water on the rotation. Okay? Now, one last thing here. When you're looking at a circus tuck, you think you're seeing a circus tuck, you're seeing the ends of their elbows because they are doing this. All right? Their elbows are tucked next to their legs. They're not surface tucking.
Because they want to be tight to get that really tight rotation. So yes. Chris, we got another one over there.
Referring back to the starting position, we've been going over all these oscillations. If on a backward inward, if they don't stop the board, then there's no starting position. So there should be a great deduction. There's no starting position. So you're going to be up from that position. So the other thing, in terms of looking at circus tucks, my question is possibly the judges should be positioned differently. Most of the meets that I've been to, the judges sit close together. Maybe, for example, in a dual meet, they should be 5 or 6 feet apart instead of so close. That way, if there is tucking, or even distance from the board, you're better able to judge that.
Well, I mean, me personally, I wouldn't necessarily want, because that's a broad span. Yeah. No, I hear you. You just threw a number out, okay. But no, I hear you about having a little bit of distance between us to be able to judge it a little more fairly because, yeah, if they get that dive that's in there really tight and really nice, and it's really close to the board, and I got my other officials 10 feet out, they may not see it as well, right? If it's a really nice dive, they may miss something else. So, something to consider for that. Okay. So once a diver assumes the starting position, the board can oscillate up to how many times? 4. Okay. That fourth one, they better be coming off that board. Okay. So we can deduct how much? Half to 2, depending on how many times they go. So once they hit that 4, start counting and be like, all right, 10, 20, 30, it's like, all right, so your deductions continue to go up at that point because they're not, so one of two things is happening. They're not comfortable with that dive yet, or they're just kind of in their own world. And they're not quite ready to take off. They needed to maybe take a few minutes. They may need more practice, whatever that looks like. But they should do the 4 and then be pressing that board to get off. The feet shall not leave the board during the oscillation prior to the final spring from the board. So the crow hop. Okay, so their feet or foot, right? There are times when there's been somebody up there that's crow hopping and their foot on the opposite side of where the officials are leaves the board, so we don't see it. Now the nice thing is that if we are positioned right, that third official may see that foot come off the board. Okay? Crow hops and excessive oscillations, okay? How many point deductions? Half to 2, okay? All right, so things to remember. Crow hop, be careful when watching the crow hop. Do not focus so much on watching those feet take off the board. We want to see the entire diver. We want to see the entire dive, okay? We want to be looking at the knees if they're going to do a pike or a straight. We want to see if there's a little bit of bend so we have a consciousness of whether they're actually breaking or if it's just the way that their body is that they cannot straighten those knees, okay? And we want to watch them through the completion of the dive, which is where? Through the water. Okay? It's through the water. I have no idea how many, like this last season was bizarre to me because I was seeing them, they touch the water and then they drop their knees. It's a break. Whether it's full or partial, it's a change in position at that point. Their chest position, so just, holding themselves high, holding themselves nice and tight to be able to perform that dive and make it look pretty, okay? Divers can get away from the board, but this isn't dangerous and should be taken off for. So if they're getting too close, or again, like I said, even if they're getting too far from the board, I've seen it happen where it's going to be dangerous that way too. But there should not be chest movement backwards. So if they're throwing this way on a back dive, that can mean that they're going to slip off the board and can cause some problems there too. It just looks bad on that one. It's not going to cause any problems for them any other way than their dive is just not going to be pretty. Tight takeoff line should be powerful, straight, and tight. So they're pushing off of that board with a nice straight body when they're coming off, depending on what their position is when they're coming through the water. We want them to have that really nice and looking really good, okay? Again, we are talking about high school, so we give a little bit of leeway as opposed to what we would, when we're watching on the Olympics, which some of those things I'm like, I swear I saw a break. I swear it. All right, now we're going to entries. So the last part of the dive that we're going to observe is they're coming right through the water, okay? We want to look at their angle of entry. Should be vertical. Again, I showed you what the prime would be on the front of the page. Okay, that would be what we would like to see. High school, we're going to have a variant of where they're going. Straight body line. Head is neutral, chin is slightly lifted a little bit, so kind of prom queen-esque, I guess. Flat hand grab over the head. So they're gonna, when they're doing a head first, they're usually gonna come here so they can break that surface of the water so they don't injure themselves when they enter the water. It's especially bad when the water's like this. Divers can be injured if they don't have their hands out in order to make that press. And the shoulder shrug and the ear squeeze, like Trent just showed us.
Wait, what?
Splashless entries. Really, really important, right? No. They can be impressive, and we saw a lot of that if you were watching the Olympics. I don't know how they do it. I've heard them talk about it, but those Chinese divers, there's some way that they do with their hands when they're entering the water to prevent that splash. They get a splash that's like this. Sometimes I've seen them go and there's nothing. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. Does it make the dive look better? Yeah. But it doesn't mean that it was a great dive. We're just seeing the end results of that. Now, most of those were pretty good dives. But splashless does not mean that we're gonna put more of a value on it, that although we want to do it and we want to deduct points because they splashed us and got us wet, we really shouldn't do that. So we have to consider that. We may see a splash, we're going to get wet, okay? So don't put too much value into the entry. Judge the dive in its entirety, from the start of it all the way through the entry, all right? So entries, thing to consider. Saves are legitimate part of a dive, for the technique part of the dive, okay? Knee saves, pike saves, that's when we'll see them either do that partial break because they're trying to get that dive in, okay? And even though the saving action underwater may be viewed clearly, so whatever they're doing underwater, we don't care. We don't care. We were watching until they went past the water, okay? So only I've seen if above the water is acceptable to deduct if we saw it above the water. So like I said, I was seeing knee breaks. They're getting, like they're passing here, but I see the break is there before they pass totally through the water, it's a break. When an entry is not vertical, okay, the cause and degree from the vertical, so whether they threw it too hard or they didn't throw it enough, depends on where they're gonna angle going into the water.
In high school, we judge the dive up until the last part of the diver is below the surface of the water. Other rules, it's when the first part of the swimmer or the diver touches the water. If the diver in high school is coming in pike and he's bent and he straightens up as he's going under the water, is that a vertical entry, or do we knock off because when he touched the water he was still pike?
Well, if he's in, I mean, if that's the position of the dive, I don't see that that's,
Yeah, what Monica's saying is they should be coming in vertical at board height. So if they're pulling that dive in under the board, it should not be getting 6.5, 7s, 8s.
Absolutely not. And that, I've been a great armchair quarterback the last couple of years. Okay, so that's what I'm seeing is that you guys are not deducting for that diver going into the water like this. I mean, they're completing the dive below the board. You're coming in short, you're coming in long, and I'm seeing 5s, 6, even 7s. That dive should be a 2 or a 3. Okay, you're scoring great on the top end, but you're not willing to give that ugly dive an ugly score.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to do it.
yeah. So what you're saying, Dwight, is actually something that, yeah, I wouldn't, I mean, I'm not gonna score that dive as like, it's not a 10, right? We're gonna do some deduction on that. But it is, obviously we want to look for that perfect vertical entry. You wanna? Huh?
In addition to not being vertical, what sort of a deduction should there be for a slight, or maybe even not so slight, twist on a non-twisting dive?
Have to.
No, you repeat the rule. If it's past 90,
Yeah, if it's, I mean, yeah, we're only doing, yeah, if you're only like, because, yeah. Yeah, then we shouldn't be scoring 6, 7s, we shouldn't be doing that. We should be deducting from there.
what about the dive that's away from the diving board? They don't come in on the diving board, they're like way over. You'll see that a lot.
I actually, this year, I saw the scariest one I've ever seen, and the kid actually dove between the two boards at Broomfield. And I was like, where's this child going? Because it was really sketchy. And his diving wasn't great either, because he's not been taught well. I mean, it's I have to yeah. Okay. So there's an example on here. A dive that is short because of a bad hurdle or slow rotation, a very little height, should be scored lower than a dive that is good takeoff, complete rotations, and great height goes over the same amount because of the late come out. So that just means that now they've over-rotated a little bit and their legs may go out the other direction. Just means they got the good rotation and stuff, but didn't quite nail that dive to go in vertical.
Go back to this gentleman's question here, diving off to the side of the board.
Yes.
Put the rule and the deduction on that. People need to know rules.
Yes.
It's no more than 2. Okay? It's no more than 2 if they go off the side of the board.
Oh yeah, I think Chris had asked that, but we got you. Yeah, and actually it should be on that paper that I gave you as well. That piece of paper that I gave you, the smaller one, it's kind of a cheat sheet that you can take to meets if you wish. You may modify it as you like. I tried to get it so it was just a half sheet, and it's pretty close to being able to fit on a dive card. Okay? So that is, all of those things are on that sheet. So if we get a chance, we can go through that. But I have a feeling we're going to get through this and we'll be done. But you definitely can ask me about those and we can figure that out. But that's just a cheat sheet for y'all to be able to do. Okay.
So for positions of the dive on talk, we've kind of already talked about it a little bit with the circus talks and cowboy talks, but
Oh, you're going to read off now.
yeah. Just remember, if you do have those split knees, half the 2-point deduction, anything with a somersault, ideally should have a quick rotation. They can square out, enter the water. You're looking for a tight tuck versus a bigger tuck. And remember, a tuck dive that's a 10 is still a 10 just because it's not as pretty as a pike dive. A tuck dive can absolutely still be an excellent dive and should be awarded as such if you see some of the really good divers do them. Pike dive, crimping of the knees on takeoff, and during the dive is a break. A lot of times where you see them is on your back dive pikes and your reverse dive pikes.
I don't want to argue about this, but what I was referring to, I think I was addressed, right? It is one of the mandatory deductions is entering the water to the side of the board. That's what we're talking about, right? And it's a half a point to a 2-point deduction. So I'm just curious, what is the rule?
So if you do see those breaks on pike dives, make sure that you do address if it's no more than 4.5. That's not something the dive referee makes the call on. You as officials need to, if you see it, call it. If you're not sure, just as with swimming, benefit of the doubt goes to the diver. So you're like, oh, I'm not sure if that was soft knee, or maybe I saw it, maybe I didn't. Still score it how you would, but if you for sure see that break, make sure you score it no more than 4.5. Anything bigger than that, that is a change of position, your dive ref will call, which is no more than 2. Typically that happens past about 45 degrees on those pike dives. And what you're looking for is a nice tight pike. And kind of Monica brought it up. Sometimes the higher divers can pike where they're looking through the legs so that they can spot the water. So you might see that on some of the 2.5s or front doubles. Straight dives, things to consider. You don't want them to be semi-parked, hiked, or excessive arching. When you see a really good back dive straight and a really good back somersault straight, because girl season, you see a whole lot of 201As and 202As. Once you see a really good one, you're like, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. So they should be coming up straight off that board, and they just naturally kind of lean into that water, or lean and then enter the water. Same thing with the back somersault straight. They take off, they snap, and where you're going to see the breaks on straight dives is right here at the waist typically, occasionally at the knees at the entry, but waist is what you want to kind of keep an eye on those straight dives, especially all of the 202As and the 5211As that you will see during girl season. And again, anytime you see one of these breaks, no more than 4.5. Anything bigger than that, your meet ref will call no more than 2. Twisters, so things to consider on free position dives. When twisting correctly, the body should be in a hollow position with the legs straight. If a diver has to bend the legs in order to not fail a head first entry, like a 5132 forward 1.5 full twist, consideration must be given to why the bend occurred and points should be deducted. When the twist begins on the board, make sure you are deducting appropriately for that. You want to make sure you're watching the shoulders. Anything past 90 off that board is a 0 dive. Anything less than 90, half point to 2-point deduction. And ideally, they're twisting in the air. All the really good divers, they come off straight off that board. They do all their twisting movements in the air, and they don't manifest that twist off the board. Ideally, we're looking for nice tight twists. A lot of the newer divers, they're just trying to get their bodies, and I get it, because when I first learned how to twist, my body did not agree with my brain on what it wanted to do. So make sure those tighter twist dives are awarded appropriately for a better score. Wobbly twists should probably be more in that unsatisfactory range. Dive categories, if you're new, you might be like, what are these numbers? So if you've got a 100, it's a forward dive, meaning they're gonna start at the back of the board doing a forward approach. If it's a 200, they're doing a back dive, so they're gonna walk to the end of the board, start their oscillations, take off. Reverse dives, back of the board, forward approach, and they will do their reverse dive or somersaults. Inward dives are the 400s, so starting at the end of the board, do their press, and they will go in forward. And 5,000s are the twists. The third number, so that hundreds number would be which dive it is. So if it's a 5-1, it's a forward twist. 5-2 would be a back twist. 5-3 a reverse twist. 5-4 an inward twist. And then followed by the number of somersaults and the number of twists. So we've got some golden rules for diving, so just make sure that you're prepared when you go into this December starting girl season, that you know the rules. We have the cheat sheets, which are great, but ideally you should not be consulting it after every single dive. There's weird things that come up, and even we have to be like, wait, what is that? And you can always ask your consult, like, is it, just clarify and make sure you're doing the right thing first and not having to fix it later. And if you do, just apologize, because the coaches are usually very gracious with that. Only call what you see. So again, if you're not sure, benefit of the doubt goes to the diver. Trust your own judgment and don't let outside influences get in your way. A lot of coaches are like, oh yeah, what a great dive. Oh, best dive I've seen in my life, You do what you see and ignore the rest. And as you go through, if you're working a lot of the same schools, you're like, oh, hey, I know you, Becky, we love Becky, or whoever, right? Becky could be having a bad day, and just because her DD is, 10-6 or something, we still judge what she does that day, not what she's done in the past, not what she might do in the future. We judge what we see that day from that diver.
Yeah, I actually had a diver who was like going to state, going to do really well at state, and he got sick just before state. His state was probably the worst he's probably ever had. So we can't just go by what we've seen before. Treat each dive equally, so it doesn't matter what it is. If you see the same dive 20 times, it doesn't matter. That diver may do it better than this other diver did, so we want to do that. Judge it by the skill, not the difficulty of it. Okay, we have a degree of difficulty for a reason. If it's didn't turn out well, we leave it to the degree of difficulty to help us out with that scoring. Judging the entire dive, so watching it from the approach all the way through the water. Okay.
This is a big one. Use the full score of the full range of scoring. So the closer a dive is to perfect, the closer that score should be to a 10, if not a 10. Don't be afraid to throw a 10. If you're with me, when I see it, I will happily award that diver. And on the flip side, the closer it is to being a failed dive, the closer that score should be to 0. So if they barely made it in and it faintly resulted a front dive tuck, then they probably shouldn't be getting 4.5s or 5s. If you have questions on that, page 106 in your rulebook, Appendix C at the bottom, it breaks down kind of specifically, kind of like with the inadequate distance for the 4.5 or the 2.5 to 4.5 range. You can always reference that.
And then panels try to throw, so if they say score, then try to throw them together. That way it kind of limits bias from the audience to think that we're watching each other of what we're throwing for scores. So limit that. And Dwight, I will get to your question in just a second. This is kind of the final thoughts. So I loved this quote that I saw in this, and it was, a judge who never gets his score deleted has not judged without mistake, but without courage. So I know a few of us in this room have been like, wow, that dive was so good, I'm gonna throw a 10. And you're good, right? It's good to do that. Or, you know what, I thought that was a 0. but the referee didn't think so, or the referee didn't think it was a no more than 2. You have the courage to throw that number. It's totally fine to throw a 0 or a 2. Okay?
And just kind of touch what Kelly said. So if you're a veteran judge and you've got newer judges, or you know that some of your officials are kind of taking a second to think about what they're doing, don't just flash a card up like she said. You can kind of hold it ready, wait till they're ready, and then flash it as a panel. I like to kind of hold it aside and then bring it up, however you want to do it. Just be considerate of your other members while they kind of mull it out and figure out what their score is.
Yeah. I think the last thing today, Monica Abilene did a wonderful video years ago. It's on YouTube. I have it right there. Is it that? It can't be that old. It's not bad though. For breaking down the dives and stuff, it's really very good because she breaks them down very, very nicely for like a, kind of a, just to get into it, to see it. So it actually is a good starting point, especially for new officials.
I think YouTube, and I want to thank Kelly and Trent, that was great. Thank you. And we're supposed to get started right back to back. Sorry we went over, so if you guys need a little break, walk around.